Good evening, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Karen Carr. I'm a partner here at Arent Fox Schiff, and I'm also a proud board member of LCE. It's really exciting to be here tonight, particularly because this event is a part of a year-long of celebrations in which LCE is celebrating its 50th anniversary of doing excellent work here in Washington, D.C. So on behalf of the firm, I'm really grateful to have you all here and really appreciate you joining us for this conversation about really a critical issue both in our communities here in Washington, D.C. and elsewhere in the country. To get the conversation started, I'd like to introduce first Rhonda Cunningham Holmes. She is LCE's executive director, and she has served in that role for the last 7 years. So, Rhonda.
Just have to leave it up here. Okay.
Has it advanced from here?
Yeah.
It just went off completely.
That's okay. It wouldn't be a program without a little bit of technical difficulty.
There we go. Now the clicker's working. Just need to leave the laptop up.
Okay, well, good evening again. I am glad to see all of you this evening. Thank you so much for coming out to celebrate an activity as part of LCE's 50th anniversary and for a really important conversation. Before we get started on this conversation, I would like to recognize some distinguished guests that we have amongst us, besides our panelists, of course. The Honorable Michael O'Keefe of the District of Columbia Superior Court. He is the Deputy Presiding Judge of the Probate Division. Thank you, Judge. You can wave so people will know who you are and they will be able to accost you afterwards. And then also Antonio Nunes from Councilmember Charles Allen's office. There you go. Thank you for joining us. The council member has been a great supporter of legal counsel for the elderly. We're glad to have you here and have the office represented. So, as Karen said, we are celebrating our 50th anniversary, and that's 50 years. 50 years of legal counsel for the elderly, providing free legal access, legal and social work services to District of Columbia elders. We are their champions. We want to make sure that they have dignity in everything that they do. And our work addresses the most important aspect of an older adult's life. That includes housing, economic security, health and safety, and self-determination. And as we do this work, we are impacting more than 10,000 people every single year. That is through our legal representation, through our outreach, through our education, and through our advocacy to reform citywide laws, regulations, and policies in long-term care facilities. So tonight, we are going to have a conversation about heirs property with our experts, even though they will tell you that they're not experts. And they are Senator Doug Jones and Tina Smith Nelson. Now, some of you may be familiar with this subject, and some of you may not. So I'm going to just give you a definition of heirs property. At its most simplistic level, it refers to property passed down across generations informally. So that is without the benefit of probate or a legal process that formally establishes title. And as a result, the property is divided among many heirs, so many people. We will talk with our experts to learn how this came about, to learn about heirs property, what it looks like in an urban setting and what it looks like in the farmlands of the South. We'll also learn what impact this issue has on the people that encounter it. And then we will turn our efforts to understand how we can help overcome heirs property issues. But first, in my mind, there is no better way to understand the human impact of this issue than to hear from one of our clients. So I'd like to introduce you to Ms. Ricks.
Favorite memories are on Sundays when we used to come from church. My mom used to make waffles, and she would have a full spread for breakfast.
Oh, what's that? The holidays were spent here when we were younger, like people, like my friends and family, like we were like a close-knit community. Everybody was used to this being their house.
Ms. Ricks came to legal counsel for the elderly because she needed to go through the probate process because her father passed without a will, so that she could access funds that she needed to renovate the house. And the only way to do that is if you are a homeowner. How are you? It's been a long time. Her father also did not have a transfer and death deed in DC, which would have allowed her to get title to the property without having to go through probate. So she had 2 strikes against her.
If I hadn't found legal counsel for the elderly, I would have been devastated. I would have lost the house, and I would have been homeless with nowhere to go.
Beyond happy. Like it was one of the biggest stresses in my life at that moment, and knowing that everything actually came together, as you can see, I can't stop smiling, like, because just thinking about it.
It is extremely important to have a will. Most of the times, the clients that come to legal counsel for the elderly, the only asset they really have is their home. So having a will prepared whereby you get to decide who you want to get your property when you die is very important. Preparing a new deed for her.
It's not about a house. It's about a home. It's about a place I've lived practically all my life, something my mother and my father fought for.
Being able to pass down that generational wealth to your family members is extremely important. It helps stabilize not only the family, but the community. And so at the age of 66, she is becoming a first-time homeowner.
I lived here my entire life. So knowing that the house would actually be passed down to us, like, just was the biggest relief ever. Yeah, I remember all.
I am really happy that the house would remain in the family. If something were to happen to me and it goes to Michael, because it's the family house. It's a family house. Now, once I'm in there, oh yeah, I'll be strutting like a rooster. Because, yeah, this is mine, I'm in it, hey.
I just love that video, and it really exemplifies the work that we do. It also puts a light on the importance of the subject that we're talking about tonight. So Ms. Ricks, she's one of the lucky ones because legal counsel for the elderly was there to help get title in her particular situation. But the complications of heirs property, they can be much more thorny than that. And that's what we're going to talk a little bit about tonight. So now let's hear from our experts. So let me begin by introducing our special guest. Doug Jones is a former U.S. Senator and former U.S. Attorney. His vast experience also includes decades spent in the private practice of law. He really just considers himself a trial attorney. Senator Jones in 2017 shocked the political establishment by winning a special election to fill a U.S. Senate seat in Alabama. Now, this was the first Democrat to do so in the state in 25 years. He quickly built a reputation as a well-regarded and effective legislator, passing more than 24 bipartisan bills into law in just 3 years. Included in that legislation was the Fair Access for Farmers and Ranchers Act, later incorporated into the Agricultural Improvement Act of 2018. And this was to support Black farmers who face significant heirs property issues. He was also responsible for shepherding the nomination of now Supreme Court Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, and Senator Jones joined Aaron Fox Schiff in 2021. Next, we have Tina Smith Nelson. She is a senior managing attorney with Legal Counsel for the Elderly. You might recognize her from the video, where she has practiced law for the last 15 years. Tina leads the civil litigation and economic and healthcare security practice. Tina has been at the forefront of heirs property and probate work in the District of Columbia. This includes participating on the Estate Administration Working Group for 5 years that had as its objective to provide recommendations to modernize and simplify the probate process in the District of Columbia. This work led to the Strengthening Probate Administration Act of 2024, which was passed into law this year. She collaborates with numerous community partners to educate seniors about heirs property and how to avoid it through proper estate planning. So I am thrilled to invite Tina Smith Nelson and Senator Doug Jones to join me in a conversation this evening. Okay. So I've given you enough of a preamble, so let's just dive in if that's okay with all of you, because I am anxious to talk a little bit more about heirs property. So I provided a definition of heirs property, and I would like for both of you to briefly build upon that definition and tell us, so that everyone here has a good flavor of exactly what heirs property is. Tell us how you see it. So Tina, I will start with you. I would like for you to share how it manifests itself in the District of Columbia.
Well, thank you, Rhonda, and thank you for everyone who's joined us this evening on this very important topic. The way that we see heirs property issues arise at Legal Counsel for the Elderly is when we have clients who come to us who are at risk of losing their family home. And they're at risk of losing it because someone did not go through the process of preparing wills and powers of attorney, leaving the property to someone in particular. And so the property gets owned by numerous heirs over numerous generations. And so the problems arises where there is a risk of the person losing their family home. As Ms. Ricks said on her video, that she had lived in that family home, for many, many years. And so heirs property shows itself up in District of Columbia by people at risk of losing that family home. And not only losing the family home, but also being displaced from the community that they've lived all of their lives. As she explained, the family used to come there for Sunday dinners. And so you lose that when there's an heirs property issue and you risk losing your family home. So it also is a loss of community as well, because you have to you may be displaced to somewhere outside of the District of Columbia when you lose that family home. And that ends up impacting the whole community because it destabilizes the community as well.
Thank you, Tina. Senator Jones, are you seeing the same issues in rural areas that you're seeing, that Tina just described? And so can you tell us what it looks like in the rural community?
Yeah, and again, I also want to thank everybody for being here tonight, and thank you for what you do. Yes, I think in rural areas, it's probably more exacerbated than it is sometimes in the more urban areas. And I will tell you, Ron, there's one part of your definition that I'm not sure I agree with. Because you said, and I understand exactly what you're saying, it's about property that was informally passed down. I think that that's being really generous, because quite frankly, the informal nature of this was, I think, a relic of Jim Crow laws, which is, because African Americans, this affects African American families more than any other families across the country, whether rural or urban. And during the time over the last 100 years, it was difficult for Black families to get wills, to have lawyers, to get estates probated, to do the kind of things that the white communities and other communities could just simply, as a matter of routine, get done. So it was almost passing down by necessity and default that they tried to, that the families had to do this. And I think that that's important to remember. I think it's really important to remember as we're trying to remedy the issues that go back before the Civil War. You can't do that overnight, and it is very, very difficult. And what I saw in the Senate as we worked on the bill that you referred to and talked about a little bit more, was in rural communities in particular, the families would own property, unlike Ms. Ricks's house. It would have been acres of land that they were trying to farm. And that was their livelihood, to try to farm, but yet they were not eligible for the same kind of loans and benefits that other farmers could get that had clear title to their property. And so they were having to come out of their own pocket to plant, to harvest, to try to sell, when the other farmers had an incredible advantage that the government had done through the U.S. Department of Agriculture. So that's where I've seen in the more rural areas. And even today, you will see generational families living on this property, some that work the property, others that don't, but they still live there. It may be in 6 mobile homes in rural Alabama that folks that live there, but it's a huge issue. And there have been problems over the course of the last century of losing that property that we can talk about too in a little bit.
Well, I appreciate the correction, because I think that is a very important point, and I hope everybody takes note of that, because that is a critically important point. We cannot get rid of it overnight, but we are going to work to make sure that we eradicate this problem. Now, you talked about the farmers, and I understand you're an attorney. You never lived on a farm.
I can't even grow tomatoes. Okay.
You heard it from him himself. But yet, you saw this issue. Can you share with us how this came to your attention and why you decided to pursue this issue when you became a senator? Well,
it came to my attention through a couple of friends that had helped in the campaign. John Zippert works with Southern Rural Cooperatives in Alabama. He also is an editor of a Black-owned newspaper, publisher of the Greene County Democrat that just coincidentally endorsed me in 2017. And I'd known John, who was a friend for a long time, and came up to Washington with a couple of other folks involved in the rural cooperatives and coalitions. And I had not really heard about this property. This was not, as a trial lawyer, is not something that I had worked on in Birmingham, Alabama. It was not as big an issue, I don't think, as it was up here. But when he explained the issue of the rural farmers, which is what the co-ops really did to try to help, then it just struck me as such an injustice, because what was happening there is all of these farmers who had been on this property for generations just could not get the same, a number. All they needed was a number from the USDA, and they couldn't get it. And, you know, for all these people that said that for the last 150, 200 years, we hadn't had some systemic racism, then tell me why these guys couldn't get numbers, okay? And they couldn't get that. So Tim Scott, Republican from South Carolina, I had heard that he was working on a bill, and we sent the staffers to try to work on this. And we came up with a very bipartisan bill. Tim and I were the lead sponsors on it. That really did three things. It allowed folks with certain documentation that didn't require a deed to be able to prove that this had been passed down and to get a USDA number so that they could have the benefits that the Department of Agriculture was giving to farmers. It did that, number one. Number two, it created a fund that the Department of Agriculture had a fund that they would then loan and give to intermediaries that could loan to these families to get them going, to get them started, to try to be able to catch up a little bit on what they had lost for generations. And finally started collecting some data, which was important. There was no real data about this issue, at least in rural America. So, you know, it was the black farmers in Alabama that came to me, and we were able, and I will tell you, nobody gave us a real shot at something like this. Not because people weren't sympathetic. Unlike today, I don't think it'd have a shot in hell, to be honest with you. But just because it was part of a big bill, and we were lucky that the Farm Bill was being passed, and we were able to get it into the Farm Bill in 2018, which, as Karen and I were talking about, is still operating today, and it has been a lifesaver for a lot of folks. So
don't say that too loud. Okay, thank you for telling us how you got engaged in this and how you picked up the mantle, and we really appreciate it because it's really important legislation. So Tina, I'm going to turn to you now. Why don't you share with us how you became engaged, because I know you primarily have been practicing property law your entire legal career, but heirs property really wasn't a hot topic previously. So how did you become engaged? I mean, it's been hot for the last 5 years or so, but I understand you started before then.
Well, yes, I would say I did, Rhonda. But I started at LCE in 2010 as the managing attorney. And if I do the math, that was 35 years. LCE was for 35 years old then. And we were providing excellent legal services throughout the district in a variety of areas, consumer issues, and public benefits issues, and a variety of issues. But there was a gap that I found in the services that we were providing. We had numerous seniors calling our hotline on a weekly basis, asking for representation and assistance with heirs property and probate matters. We were providing them with referrals as best we could because there was no one physically in the District of Columbia providing that hands-on direct legal services. And so I decided to have a conversation with our then executive director to tell him that there was a gap in services that legal counsel for the elderly could provide. We had seniors calling in who were either calling in because they were living in homes that needed to be repaired, or they were living in homes that needed to be retrofitted as they aged and became disabled, but they couldn't avail themselves to any loans or any grants in the district because they were not the deeded owner. The property was still in their parents' names, sometimes their grandparents' names, sometimes their great-grandparents' name. And so they couldn't avail themselves to what they needed in terms of resources so that they could fix up their homes. And then the other group of seniors who were calling in were seniors who had fallen into tax foreclosure. Because in the District of Columbia, if you're not the deeded owner, you don't get to take advantage of the homestead exemption, the senior citizen exemption. And we had many seniors calling in that advised us that their property was no longer receiving those exemptions and their property taxes skyrocketed, sometimes tenfold. And so they were at risk of losing their homes because they could not have conversations with the Office of Tax and Revenue or find resources to pay down those taxes. And so that was something that I decided that LCE was prime and ready to step in to fill that gap, not only to protect the senior and keep that family home, but also the wealth and the equity that had been built up in that home for the years that their parents and their grandparents had been, homeowners there. And so that was a gap in services, and LCE was prime, I was prime and ready to step in and fill that gap.
And we're very glad she did. And now you know why she's on for the elderly. Let's talk a little bit about the impact of heirs property. When we started this program, we talked about Miss Ricks and the problems that she was having. But her case probably was not one of the more difficult ones that you might see, or the more difficult aspects of heirs property. So Tina, let me stay with you and ask you to share with us perhaps a story that you might have of somebody who had a more complicated situation, and what would have happened if you had not intervened?
So the client that immediately comes to mind is a client by the name of Mr. Jackson. It was Mr. Jackson and 3 of his brothers. So there was the Jackson 4, not the Jackson 5. But he came to us because their mom had recently passed, and she passed without a will. And so we had an issue of heirs property because there were 4 heirs that received an interest in the property. 3 of the brothers lived together in the home, my client, a disabled brother, and another brother. And there was a 4th brother who lived in Maryland. The 4th brother who lived in Maryland wanted to get his interest in the property. He wanted to get paid. And so he brought a suit to ask the court to partition the property, to sell it, so that he could get his 4th share of the property. We went through mediation for that particular case. Fortunately for this particular client, the person who died, their mom, had some other investment assets that the 3 brothers who lived together in the home were able to pool together and buy out the interest of the 4th brother who wanted to sell the house. And that is not typical of the clients who come to us, because most of the clients who come to us, the only asset in the estate that's left by the time they come to us is the home. So in this particular case, because there were other assets available, the brothers could pool together their money and buy out the brother who wanted to sell. And it was so important for these individuals, these brothers, to maintain that home ownership. Again, they had grown up in this house all of their lives with their parents, and they were all living there together, taking care of their disabled brother. And had they been forced to sell it, they would have lost that. They would have lost the family connection. They would have fractured the family. Who knows where the disabled brother may have had to move to, and that family would have been broken down. And so it's very important, and I'm glad that I was able to assist that family in maintaining that home ownership, and also, again, the equity that had been built up in their home over the years, and that will allow them to then pass that generational wealth down to their future generations.
Well, thank you, Tina. I mean, it is very fortunate for the Jackson 4, as you said, but for the Jackson family to be able to come to legal counsel for the elderly, because even though they had that asset, truly, if they hadn't had a lawyer who was advocating
Correct.
for them,
Absolutely.
it may have been partitioned.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then they would have been in the situation that you described. So, Senator Jones, do you have a story that you want to tell us about any of the farmers that you either met or learned about during the course of your working with Mr.
Zippert.
Zipper?
Zippert, yeah.
Okay.
Interesting name.
Yes.
But, I don't have a specific. There was a young farmer that after we were able to do this that I talked to. I don't even remember his name. But we were talking earlier, I still see John Zippert at various political events. And I saw him just recently at an event where we were both talking and speaking. And every time I see him, he reminds me of the success of the heirs property bill that Tim and I passed, and how many people it's affected in Alabama. And it's really special because this was not legislation that like grew the economy of the state of Alabama by leaps and bounds, but it grew the economy of families, certain families, and that's really important. I think people forget a lot of times, and I mentioned the fact that I think that this was part of that we cannot exclude the Jim Crow laws as creating this problem, because between 1910 and 1997, 90% of Black-owned property was lost because of developers, because of partitions, for various reasons, where heirs property was literally taken from families, usually by big white landowners, okay? 90% of the Black-owned property. And even, I haven't looked at this statistic, but when I was in the Senate, 60% of property owned by Black families in this country, 60% were heirs properties. And that creates incredible obstacles. And so to be able to try to work with folks, and you talked about for the last 4 or 5 years, one of the things I think I'm proudest of, not just to be able to get the numbers and the things for these farmers, but what we did in 2018 helped bring attention to heirs property around the country. And it's those little things like that when you can throw that ripple in a pond, that rock in a pond that creates that ripple. And I think it's had an impact on so many folks, but it was particularly a problem for African-American families in this country for generations. And it's still a problem, but today it's a little bit less problem than it was 10 years ago.
Right. I mean, 90%, you said. That is
90% is a stunning statistic.
It is a stunning statistic. I don't know if the rest of you knew that already, but that is a stunning. And so we really do appreciate your throwing that pebble in there. And really in the pond, because as you said, it had a ripple effect. And, the impact is really phenomenal.
Yeah.
And so, whenever we talk about the impact, you've talked a little bit about Jim Crow and the racial impact. So I want to stay on that, the racial impact of heirs property. Because you said 60%, so I don't know if it's still 60%. We might be down to 50% of Black homeowners being involved in heirs property, but still that is a very large number, way, way too large. And we need to do something about that. Is there anything else that you want to share about the racial impact of heirs property?
I just think it's obvious, though. The only thing else I would share is that, and I'm going to get in trouble.
You're in good company. Yeah.
Look, today, as we sit here, okay, all of those impacts are being ignored. Okay? They're just being ignored. And you cannot deny those impacts and to try to figure out ways to do some things. When I said a moment ago that I don't know if today that bill would pass, I really mean it. And if it did pass, I don't know if it would get signed by the President of the United States, because it just seems to have kind of completely flipped. And we cannot allow that to happen. And I think that the important piece of this, look, home ownership, property ownership should be the American dream. It should not be the dream of just a segment of people who were born on third base and thought they hit a triple. It should be the dream of everybody. And so the work, we've just got to continue to build on it. And we can't, as the old civil rights song says, we just can't let nobody turn us around. And there's a lot of work still to be done. The impacts are still being felt. But fortunately, there are tools. There are tools in place today that people can use in the courts, administratively, to try to correct some of those wrongs. And we need to make sure, and that's what I appreciate everybody here in this panel of bringing this to folks' attention. And I think it's probably even more important than ever today. We've been able to do some things, but right now it's a challenge. It's going to be a challenge when you go in and try to deal something. Because remember, part of the problem of the loss of property was not just what happened often with bigger tracts of land. There would be 10 heirs or more. And one person, somebody would approach one heir and say, I'm going to give you pennies on the dollar. And that particular heir needed those pennies. It said, sure. And then they filed something to petition it. They bought it up because nobody else could do it, and it was gone. And the next thing you know, there's a target sitting there or something. So it's important to try to pick, property ownership, home ownership. That's the American dream, and we need to protect that for everybody in this country.
Well, thank you for that. Yeah. We're glad you came along at the time you did, that the bill got passed, it was funded, and that those Black farmers could get that number so that they could go in and be able to work their farm and actually survive.
Yep.
So that it's not, that number isn't 100%. Tina, in the District of Columbia, Black home ownership has gone from 46% in 2005 down to 35% in 2021. So the number may be different now. We don't have the current statistics, but I want to know from you, do you think that heirs property has anything to do with the decrease in Black home ownership here in the district? And if so, why?
I'm going to say very likely that heirs property does play a role in that. Generally, just thinking about the Black communities often face a lot more barriers generally, just trying to purchase homeowners and become homeowners in America for many of the reasons that the senator just mentioned, resources, racism, for those reasons, and they are at a much higher rate likely to lose their home as well. And when we're looking here in the District of Columbia, DC has turned from what we used to call Chocolate City to Vanilla Swirl because of gentrification that has come along. And a lot of the neighborhoods that have been gentrified have been neighborhoods that have had high Black home ownership, and those homes have been lost because of heirs property issues. And so absolutely, it does have an impact. And what we have to do is continue working to untangle those title issues so that we can have a clearly defined owner of the property that is able to, again, get the financial resources that are necessary to maintain that home ownership. And if we do run into a situation where the home has to be partitioned and has to be sold, at least those communities are able to maintain the equity that was built up in those homes so that those heirs can either use that money to make improvements on their own homes, or if they don't own a home, then they can take that equity and buy a home. And so it creates wealth within the Black community, wealth that can be passed down from generation to generation.
Can I follow up with something? And I don't have any empirical data on this, but I bet you that so many people, and this is so important, why you are here and what you do is to get the word out to people, that they understand and know there is help out there. There is legal help with people that will want to help them, because so many people, it's so easy. especially for African American families, to say, oh, hell, I can't, the cards are stacked against me, and I'm just going to move on. It's really easy to move on sometimes. So getting that word, I think there's probably a fair amount of folks who just let that go and did not know or didn't pursue that thing. So that's why what you do is so important, and then getting the word out is so important, and getting your clients to get the word out is so important.
And just to piggyback on what you said, you know, when we look at the history of Black communities, communities of colors in this country, there's a general distrust of the legal system.
Absolutely.
There's a distrust of lawyers. So you're reticent to even go and get the help that you need because of the history that exists.
Yeah.
So having enough people not only in this space, but people understanding the history of it, the cultural aspects of it, and understanding, you know, there's going to have to be a much more concerted effort to reach communities of color, to give them that information, that they feel comfortable that they are not going to be taken advantage of and their homes are not going to be stripped from them because, you know.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Indeed. Thank you both. I want to stop and ask, I'm going to bring the audience in, so we're going to have a few questions from you all. But before I turn to that, Tina, I want to ask you a question because you used a term, and I want to make sure that everybody understands what it is. You used the term tangled title. So can you define that? Tell us what you really mean by that, and what is the impact of having a tangled title?
So tangled titles exist when you don't have clear ownership. There's no clear owner of the property. And so the property is owned by numerous heirs over numerous generations. And you run into a problem when you are trying to get resources for repairs or to pay taxes when you have so many heirs that need to be located in order to get anything done. And you have the problem of heirs' property perpetuating itself. It's like a domino effect when there's so many little pieces of the property owned by so many different people that it's impossible to really come together to find a solution that would keep that family home. And untangling like a spider web, who owns what percentage, and you don't have the situation where one person who owns 1/35 of the property is going to go out and sell their 1/35 to some property developer who then petitions to sell the property and get rid of, you know, that family home.
Right, because it takes a lot. Okay, well, thank you. I said I was going to bring you all in, but I want to ask you one more question.
She's not going to bring you in, folks. Okay, let's just face it.
You know, I'm really excited to talk to you all because you all have led efforts to resolve this problem on the local level, on the national level. And I just want to turn to the legislation because you talked a little bit about it already. But I want you to explain to everybody what has been, Senator Jones, what has been the impact that you have seen as a result of passing this legislation. I know you did it with Senator Scott of South Carolina, and so it's great that it could be a bipartisan. I also looked up and it said it was 99-1. I want to know who that one person was, but it doesn't seem to be in the record. But at any rate, could you?
I want to know who that is too. I remember that.
But tell us, what has been the impact of that legislation?
No, I think it's been a dramatic impact for certain families. You know, folks that were there, that were trying to farm, that were doing those things. You know, look, farmers, because this really was directed for farmers,
right?
Okay, ranchers and farmers. And farmers have a tough enough time as it is. And when you have to do it all on your own, even if you're just farming 20 acres or 30 acres, that's a tough road to hoe if that is going to be your livelihood. And to be able to get a number and the benefits, loans, benefits from the USDA was just it was a burden that was just lifted off the shoulders of these folks and allowed them to compete with other farmers. And so, and as Tino said, help build generational wealth that has not been built for generations. I mean, it has been sliding away from these families consistently over the last 150 years. And now they're in the families, and everyone knows that it's your property that in fact builds that generational wealth. Not everyone can be Bill Gates or Steve Jobs. It's their property that is the main focus of their wealth that you then pass down through the family. And so it has had, I think, tremendous impacts. And I have not seen the data on this, but when you have impacts on families here and there throughout what amounts to, at least in Alabama, poorer counties, the counties in Alabama that are the poorest have had the economic benefit of this probably as much as anything that county has seen, because it cleared up so much for them. Those counties are quite poor, and this was able to bring that economy to those families, and that boosted the economy for everybody.
That is wonderful. Tina, I'm going to ask you to briefly comment on something. You've been involved with the passage of a number of laws here in the District of Columbia: the Uniform Real Property Amendment, the Transfer on Death Act, the Partition of Heirs Property Act, and the Strengthening Probate Administration Act. And that's just to name a few. Just briefly, because I want to prove the senator wrong.
It happens all the time around my house, okay?
What has been the impact of that? Can you briefly just summarize what's been the impact of those laws on heirs property, if it has been an impact?
Well, it definitely has been an impact, Rhonda, and it continues to be an impact. One of the things that has significantly changed is it makes going through the probate process easier to navigate. We often have people who are going through that process without an attorney, who are going through it pro se. And so making the process easier for people who don't have an attorney, like folks at LCE and our community partners at DCALF, that are in the audience, who have to go through this process alone. It makes it easier for them. It also lessen some of the costs that are associated with probate. Oftentimes people don't participate in the probate process to transfer the title of the home because the cost is so prohibitive. There are filing fees, there are publication fees. If you can't locate the heirs, you may have to get a heir search firm to find all of the heirs that used to live in the District of Columbia and have moved north to Chicago or south to North Carolina, and finding all of these individuals is very costly. And so people just throw their hands up and do nothing. And so you end up in heirs property situations. So the new laws also lower some of those costs associated with probate. The new laws also allow, when you have so many heirs owning the property, like in the case of the Jackson Four, it gives the co-owners the first rights of refusal to buy out that fourth person or that fifth person or that other heir who wants to sell their interest before they sell it to a developer or an outside person. It gives them the rights of first refusal to purchase that share. And it also ensures that if the property does have to go to a partition sale, that it's done with court oversight, and it's done where the value of the property is sold at fair market value. So you're not letting someone sell the property for a lowball number that you mentioned, Senator Jones, just to get something, but it ensures that there's some fair market sales. And it also, because of the transfer of death deed, provides an avenue to give your property to someone after your death without them having to even go through probate. Because what we want to do is avoid probate as much as possible. And through the transfer of death deed, you can identify a beneficiary or beneficiaries to receive your property after your death without them having to go through the time and expense of probate. So those are just some quick and easy ways that these new laws are impacting the residents of the district.
We thank you for your efforts and your assistance in getting those laws passed. So I'm going to briefly turn to the audience and see if there are any questions that you would like to ask of our panel while I give them a minute to think about their closing remarks. So I'm gonna give you each about a minute. So
Oh, hell, you know a senator's going to take more than a minute.
I do. Yes, please.
That's a real easy one. So Legal Counsel for the Elderly provides free legal services to seniors in the District of Columbia who are 60 and older.
Exhibit A.
There is an associated income requirement as well. Yes.
To Tina, my colleague, two big issues I'd appreciate your comment on: bond and reverse mortgages.
Okay.
Okay.
Woo, I don't think
As impediment to the passing of property.
So I will say that Tina will address that question in an abbreviated fashion. And then during the reception that follows, we can have a more in-depth conversation. Tina?
I will say that bond is definitely one of those things that prohibit individuals from going through probate as well. Because if a person dies without a will that waives bond in the District of Columbia, in order to open up a probate to transfer title, you have to post the bond. And a lot of times, if you have a low income person, they are not able to have the income that is needed for them to post the bond to even open up the probate. So that's my short answer. And then in terms of the reverse mortgage, especially for
Then we're going to send him to Joanne.
right, we're gonna, especially for reverse mortgages, and you know, I hate those commercials that come on TV with Henry Winkler and all those other people telling people to get reverse mortgages, because when you go through it, they don't really explain the consequences of your spouse, of your children, of your heirs when you get a reverse mortgage, because when you pass, then the reverse mortgage becomes due, and you could lose the property that way unless somehow the heirs are able to assume the loan. So those definitely have an impact on the ability to maintain that home ownership. And I hate those commercials. Absolutely.
Thank you, Tina. Thank you, Murray, for the question. Is there one other? Okay. What? Holly.
I've been a public interest lawyer all of my career, and probate is not one of those that most people aspire to or even provide services across the country. How does this get corrected in all 50 states?
Well, I don't know. We're going to have to turn to Senator Jones, who works on the national level.
I am not running for president, so I don't have a clue. Well, there is a uniform heirs property and partition law that's out there. Professor Thomas Mitchell from Boston College Law School doing some amazing work to try to bring that to the attention of various state legislatures. That is a big step. But candidly, it takes advocacy. It takes a John Zippert type person to sit down with a legislator and say, this is a problem. It's a problem for your constituents. It's a problem for the state. It's very simple, and this is not going to hurt anybody, but will help so many. It just takes that advocacy, and I would look at seeing the 50 states. The second thing that you mentioned, though, is a whole different issue, and that is getting lawyers to do probate, because that's something I stayed away from. That is not something, I was a trial lawyer, and probate was not something that I did. Trying to get that interest in real estate, probate, decedents to states and trust, I think is a challenge. It's a real challenge, and maybe a little bit more of a challenge going forward with the changing legal atmosphere that we've got in this country.
Yes, it is a challenge, and we have experienced it. But all you lawyers out there who aren't doing any pro bono work, have we got some cases for you?
Right.
But the best part about it, in addition to having cases, we have people who can mentor you along the way. It's something that really is very important and valuable it is valuable to the people who you're helping, but it is also valuable to you because you get an extreme amount of satisfaction from having helped somebody secure their home and all of their assets that are being passed down. And I also want to just say, we talked about bond and it costs a lot. For many of you who are here are aware that the mayor's budget just dropped. And I'm pleased to say that the mayor did include $1 million in the budget for Heirs property, which helps to make sure that some of those fees are covered for our clients. Okay, so we are about done because there's still food back there. There are still drinks that need to be consumed this evening. And so I want to give our panelists an opportunity to have some closing remarks and really want to focus on moving forward. So Tina, I'm going to start with you. How do we move forward?
Well, we move forward with everyone in this room. Everyone in this room plays a role, from the federal government to the local government to the private bar to legal services organization. It takes all of us to really address this issue. I'm glad to hear that the mayor saw the light and is continuing to fund legal services through continuing to fund heirs property issues in the District of Columbia. So we need money from local governments to provide to legal services organizations such as Legal Counsel for the Elderly, DC Affordable Law Firm, Christian Legal Aid, and the other legal service organizations in DC that are in this space to do probate work, so that we can hire enough staff to be able to represent all of the clients that need our services. We also need continued collaboration with pro bono partners and firms such as Aaron Fox, who agreed to take individual cases from us and have clinics with us, with our clients, because there's an overflow of clients who need this assistance. And so having the private bar partner with us in this space to provide that free legal services is critical. And also, lastly, I would say collaboration with, again, everyone in this room, local government, Access Justice Commission, all of our community partners. So as Senator Jones mentioned earlier, so we can go out and do that education, because people don't know what they don't know. And so I think it's incumbent upon all of us in this room to get that information out there, to educate the community about what is heirs property, what is probate, how do I protect my assets, how do I ensure that my children and my grandchildren are able to get the wealth, either from my family home or from the other assets that I have. So it's going to take all of us pushing and moving forward to make sure that the community understands the critical role that this plays, again, not only in stabilizing individual families, but in stabilizing the entire community.
Thank you, Tina. We all need to be involved. That's a call, okay? Clarion call. Senator Jones, what are your final thoughts on this subject, just for tonight? It's not your final thoughts, period, but for tonight, as we close out this panel, I really do want to make sure that we hear from you last.
Well, my final thoughts on this are not specifically on heirs property.
Okay.
Heirs property is one part of a problem for communities and for the elderly. So I want to address my final comments to you individually, collectively, and the work that you do. My parents were lucky. My parents were lucky they had a son who went to law school. So they got free legal advice. I didn't know crap about elder law and doing things, but as they got older and they needed some assistance, I had to learn. I had to do things that was outside of my comfort zone as a litigator. And, my mom and dad, as they got older, there were a number of things, including the fact that the same week that I announced that I was going to run for the Senate, I had to move my parents out of their home Mom into an assisted living and dad into long-term care next door to her, where she, for 4 years before his death, would take a golf cart down to sit with him every day, every day. So you learn and you do. And so the point is, not every elderly person in America has that son or daughter that has the ability that they can lean on, a family member, even a friend. And so the work you do is so important, and it is not just heirs property. There are so many things that the folks in this country need, and they all fit together. It's like the dots, together. They all connect the dots with the quality of life that somebody's going to have. And so that's the thing that I want to talk about. That's the thing I want to leave you with, is making sure that everybody connects the dots with the legal services that you can provide to these folks in their final years that will give them that quality of life, that will often, in the case of heirs property, allow them to pass that home. I don't think folks, unless you're in this position, understand fully how important psychologically it is for folks to be able to say, I'm leaving this for my children. My mom and dad, they're both deceased now. They went through so much of their life savings, and they felt so guilty because they had not prepared and planned. And they felt guilty because they wanted to leave something for me and my sister. And I said, Mom, this is your money. This is not something that is ours. It is yours. But your dad worked so hard. I said, he worked so hard to take care of you. But people don't understand that sometimes, just psychologically and emotionally. It is so important to be able to leave that property, especially if it's family property, for a lot of people. And so going forward, remember to connect those dots. Remember the impact, the emotional impact that it has. But also remember this. Remember that there are systemic barriers that have placed people where they are. And those barriers still exist. Sometimes they're getting stronger. And without you pushing back, standing up, speaking out, doing what John Lewis said, cause a little good trouble to make sure these clients have that, then it is gonna be a sad state of affairs for those folks, and it doesn't need to be. So we're the bridge, we're there to help them. And so thank you for all that you do. And going forward, continue to do it, because I'm telling you, your work's gonna be cut out for you. Going forward, at least for a little bit, it's going to be cut out, because there are going to be forces, I think, in this country today that'll want to snap up that property like that and try to make a club in D.C. that costs $500,000 to join. Okay, that is going to happen, and I'm not trying to be political. I know it sounds like it, and it probably is, but that's okay. It is the reality. And we are we're the guards. We're the ones to say, no, we're going to protect our elderly. We're going to protect these folks, and we're going to build that generational wealth that has been lost for so many years. So thank you for having us. Thanks for doing it.
So thank you for that, and thank you both of you for participating in this conversation tonight. I think that we all have learned something, and you hear your marching orders as well. Again, let me ask you to thank our guests, and then I'm going to turn it over to Karen to close out the program tonight. But we really appreciate the information that you shared with us, and we just want to thank you for being here tonight.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Well, that was a perfect segue. Speaking of marching orders, just one more time, team, to thank Rhonda and to thank the senator and to thank Tina. They did an excellent job tonight. So to the topic of marching orders, I'm back now just to ask for you to consider support. As we indicated, LCE is celebrating its 50th anniversary this year. And that's 50 years of celebrating and serving our older neighbors across DC. And so as part of that 50th anniversary celebration, LCE is in the midst of a campaign. And we're seeking to raise $1 million and to bring 1,000 new donors to LCE by the end of the year. And all of that is aimed at ensuring that LCE can continue to do the excellent work that it's been doing, including the work that Tina and the Senator have been talking about tonight. So if you would be so inclined to offer your support tonight, we have a way to make that very, very easy, assuming we can get the slide advanced quickly. To propel our Heirs property work, but all of the excellent work that LCE is doing. Shortly, there'll be a QR code on the screen, if I just push the screen. And that QR code, as you know, will take you directly to a particular website, and that website will enable you to make a donation or to consider making a donation to LCE. I also have an exciting announcement as part of that attempt to introduce 1,000 new donors to LCE this year. For tonight, we have a particular donor who has indicated that all first-time gifts for tonight up to $200,000 will be matched. So any gift that you make tonight to LCE will be matched dollar for dollar up to $200,000. Thank you again so much for joining us. I know it's a rainy evening and it would have been just as easy to head home and finish your day at home. Thank you so much for coming and for spending the time with us here at Errant Fox with this incredible team. And we hope very much that you'll stick around and enjoy refreshments and fellowship with each other. And in the meantime, the QR code will stay right there just in case. Thanks, everyone.